Thank you, Amy. Thanks, Amy, very much. And hello, everybody here on Zoom and all those on LinkedIn. Really good to have you here with us for what I think is a really interesting, good, important conversation with two very experienced and well-talking individuals who I've known for many years and worked with. So this conversation we are having, as you can see, it's how to scale your ERP team without sacrificing quality. And what I want to say in the opening for this is when it comes to success in your ERP, whether that is building out an ERP practice if you're a partner of VAR, or whether it is you're a user of Acumatica or a user of another ERP, and you are growing and scaling your company and integrating ERP, implementing or integrating it, whether you're one or the other, there is one single clarity around hiring, and it is that the right people at the right time or the wrong people at the wrong time can make or break projects and can make or break your success, even as a company. Finding those people, however, and fitting them into your world, into your growth, into your organization, also can really feel like a puzzle. There are things you can do that are absolutely helpful. There are things you can absolutely avoid, but that are oftentimes not known in the industry or seen. And knowing those pieces, knowing those pitfalls, and being able to plan proactively for them and avoid those pitfalls or get out of those pitfalls if you have fallen into those. And I can find sometimes that those can save you months or years of work and anywhere from tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars of spent money. So we are here with a couple of great people, and I want to share with you a little bit about them. So this is the nature of this conversation. I'm going to move forward here. There we go. So I want to talk a little more about why does this matter? Why does hiring the right people at the right time so critical to specifically in the world of ERP? And the fact is today that 41% of ERP implementations will overspend when the right people are not in the right place. To where hiring quality talent, it isn't just a nice to have, but it is an actual success factor that can make or break that effort. And also those who are scaling, because you are growing fast, does not necessarily mean that you are not going to hire as well. You can hire fast. You can scale your practices and have hiring and talent development and the growth of talent not be a massive inhibitor. It happens to be a massive inhibitor, and I think that is because a lot of people don't really understand the values and specifically don't have in mind the potential pitfalls and fall into those, that they become a major risk. So today's conversation and stories by Jeremy and Shel are going to help you to understand where those pitfalls are, what to do if you fall into them, how to avoid them in the first place. Today I have with me two excellent speakers, and it's very experienced people when it comes to the world of ERP. One of them is Shel Waggener, who is president and founder of the CIO Perspective. Shel, I'm going to have you elaborate a little bit because you are in flux in your world, and I'm going to allow you to share exactly what that experience is. But for the moment, Shel has been a senior executive and leader of organizations, end user organizations in the Acumatica ERP world, and has now has a breadth of experience and specifically deep experience from the end user perspective as an end user executive of an Acumatica company. And then we also have with us Jeremy Houskeeper, who I have known as well for many years. Jeremy is a very competent leader, currently the Chief Operations Officer of Premier Tech Partners, one of the premier Acumatica VARs in the country, in the world right now, doing a whole lot and certainly scaling and dealing and facing with those challenges of scaling a Acumatica reseller organization. Shel and Jeremy, welcome to you guys both.
Thanks, Julian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, very happy to be here, Julian.
Shel, can you give us a little bit more depth on your background and kind of what you're doing now in your words and what you find is important?
Well, from an ERP context, I have been a chief information officer for small to Fortune 50 companies in my career. having worked in the tech industry and served as the senior IT leader for companies like Sybase, Octel, Lucent, where I was the CIO for the INS division. I've also been the Vice Chancellor and CIO for the University of California at Berkeley, which was in support of research activities, where we had a whole different set of ERP challenges. And most recently, I've spent the last 7 years as president of a construction company where we implemented Acumatica and used an ERP in that context. So I've both been a technology executive where we do selections and implementations of ERPs for our companies, as well as in the C-suite executive side, utilizing those services and depending on ERPs to deliver what we need, to the companies.
Brilliant. Thanks, Shel. Jeremy, you haven't always been a COO. In fact, I think I see you as truly rising through the ranks of your organization to become a really effective leader. And I wanted to maybe, would you give us a little bit about what that path has been for you personally through to where you are?
Sure. So I've had a series of roles in nonprofits, in digital marketing, and working with the Chamber of Commerce, where I worked with many small businesses and got to understand the needs of those businesses, which has served me really well as I've moved into into Premier Tech Partners, where we're trying to advance the technology of the companies that we serve, moving small businesses or medium businesses to larger, and sometimes businesses that are going public. And so we've in that process of coming in as in business development and then working in through customer success, I found a niche where I essentially woke back up to realization that why I was successful originally in business development was because I was doing the operations also, and I had a lot of I suppose control, or I had a lot of creativity in how I could meet the needs of the client. And that essentially has been my business development philosophy all along the way is what is the challenges that the client's having, and how can I really serve them, and sometimes begrudgingly of the company that I'm working for, because I find creative ways to meet their needs, and sometimes that pushes the organization. And so in this role, as I was learning ERP and finding my right place, essentially it landed back in operations. The company was purchased from a larger investor and became more privately owned. And in that process, there were some gaps that I felt that I could fill, and so I did. And so I kind of worked more in operations and started navigating the philosophy and what might make our agency, our circumstances different than some others, and I've been focusing on what that difference is. And for us, that's being a boutique agency that doesn't have a lot of gatekeepers in between the client and the consultant, essentially. And so there's a close connection between the consultant and the clients, and we believe that gives better and more precise service. Anyway, we're excited to learn how we can scale a model like that. And that's a little bit more complicated because of the pressure that it puts on the consultants, but we're excited for it.
Yep, the natural challenges you will face as you continue to do that growth. I get you there. Okay, want to talk for just a minute about kind of hiring today in ERP. In general, there has been a shift from a candidate-led to an employer-led market, especially over this past year. I can tell you from my seat as the leader of a recruiting and staffing company that 2 years ago today, there was a lot of recruiting to be done. There was a lot of companies that were needing to have talent. And it was very common for a company to say, hey, if you have someone that can spell ERP and they have a pulse, we'd like to talk with them. Whereas today, it is very much more of a employer's choice. So I think with that shift, we have seen kind of an increased competition for specialized talent. I think that we are looking there's a lot of need for specific talent, not just like anybody that has anything and they can learn, but they're really being, I think employers are being a little more uh, intentional around finding exactly what they need and going with exactly what they need. And I think along with that, what that means also is that there has been a rising demand for some flexibility. If a hiring manager now is not just going to take anybody and train them, they're going to say, I need someone that really has, like, they have EDI, they've worked in packaged goods, and they have EDI, SPS integration. Like, they have very specific things. That's just one example that happens to come to my mind. Oftentimes, what I'm seeing in the industry is that people are leaning towards contractors, because these people can go in and fight a fire, do exactly what's needed, need no ramp up, and be able to serve the need immediately. And yet other people still find that hiring a full-time permanent person is a much more is the way they want to go, because they can be very intentional about bringing on the right culture, the right people to foster their culture. So I find it's a little bit of mix of both. I think I've seen what both of you have done. You both have been leaders in organizations that were a lot smaller and a lot more simple in the past, and grew to be much more complex in the future. Both of you, though, have a very different pathway. Jeremy has gone the route of being a partner and having those complexities. Shel, in my experience with you, Shel, while you have led many different organizations, most of my work of you has been with an Acumatica end user company who has been highly technological and has had processes become much more complex, systems much more integrated, and you have worked to scale a company that is using that ERP. You happen to be a very knowledgeable ERP professional, but you are leading a company that is using those products. So I think that for both of you, I think it is probably a common truth that your journey to scale your organizations has been around aligning the hiring you have done. The ERP hiring in particular has been aligned around growth stages in your company. You're not just hiring anybody you can and doing all the work that you possibly can right away. You have to scale that with a methodology that supports the growth of your company, not ERP, but your company's health. So, which includes ERP, but also includes a lot of other things. So I think that choosing the right talent for the right task has been something that has been a real key for you. You need to find that person who can do that thing at that point in the total process. And of course, I think you have seen, I imagine, Jeremy, you have seen the overhiring. You've probably had more talent than you have needed, and you have had to be able to scale that. The running the risk of overstaffing or bringing on people who don't have that exact talent, and now you're spending your resources trying to manage and utilize people who don't necessarily have the exact experience and expertise that you need, and the pitfalls there. I think you both would agree that expertise, it's an investment, and it's not just a cost. It's something you invest in. But I wanted to, knowing these ideas, I guess I wanted to open up. You both have expressed to me stories at the time, and I wondered if one or both of you had any particular stories around your journey in terms of hiring that right people at the right time, and any kind of pitfalls you may have avoided or ones you got in and you were able to get out of that could be helpful to the audience. I'm wondering if you might share a story or two with us.
Yeah,
Sure.
happy to. I think Jeremy and I have had different trajectories, but I would suggest that engaging with ERP is a lens into the problem of expertise, because you have the ERP is simply a reflection of the different views and different needs of an organization. Right? You have compliance needs. Well, compliance needs are usually a function of a back office activity, right? They know they have to do something a certain way. They have to report it a certain way. They have to have the right data. Whereas somebody in the production side of the house, they're focused on delivery. But they both need an ERP environment. So if you load or stack a project like an ERP environment with too much of one side and not enough of the other, you'll end up with a product or a project focus that is unbalanced for where the overall organization could benefit. And that's what I've seen with ERP implementations, repeatedly throughout my career. And unfortunately, I've had to put in too many of them through my career. And they're not fun things to do because they are very, very challenging to get all the, this common concept of stakeholders, right? And you get all the stakeholders together. But the stakeholders often don't necessarily speak the same language. They don't have the same foci around what it is that they need out of the product. It's very difficult to balance those needs because there's always time, quality, speed, questions around cost, quality issues. So anytime you put in an ERP, you're going to have that balance of issues. So the question is, okay, in a perfect world, do you want all experts, right, to be able to deliver the best possible product? Most people would say yes, but I would argue that it's really more a question of expert in what, and can they effectively communicate that expertise to the project so that when you're going to deliver, it balances. Because having overloading on too much expertise, if I bring in somebody who is a Sigma black belt and an accounting expert and really is going to focus on how to improve my time to revenue by implementing the ERP, are they going to understand the perspectives of the other use cases for that ERP? Maybe not. Specifically, you often will bring in, I'll say Acumatica, an incredibly powerful, incredibly flexible tool, but it doesn't do everything, right? And in today's modern enterprise, you're going to have other tools that need to be implemented. And so then it's not just about the API and how you exchange data, but why? What's the workflow? What's the benefit? Everybody says, I only want to implement, I just one and done, put in the data once and everybody can use it. But that data gets updated, right? So where's it being updated? So my experience in this is too many times early in my career, I tried to put the top people all together on the project because they were top in their space, but they weren't necessarily open to understanding the other people's needs on the project. And you end up in a situation where instead of effective tension between different perspectives, you end up everybody fighting for the limited resource to make sure the project delivers what they want. And then the company suffers because you don't actually end up with a product or a project that's going to benefit all the users. You're better off getting close with all of them. It's the perfection is the enemy of the good here. So you have to have an expert in Acumatica, no question. But do you have a domain expert in Acumatica that really understands your business and your use case and your industry? Hiring somebody who's brilliant in Acumatica, but who focuses on the retail industry and having them come in and try to implement Acumatica for construction isn't that the product is going to be so vastly different. There's lots of commonalities. It's going to be they can't translate the stories and the use cases from one industry to the other effectively. And you end up wasting a lot of cycles. So you brought in the best Acumatica person, but were they the best or the right one for your particular project? And I've made that mistake too many times in my career where I thought I had, the A team across all of these people, and you just end up with an A team that argues with each other. You want A team, but you want collaborative A team.
And did you ever find, was there
an experience in that? Yeah.
Was there an instance, Shel, where like a scenario, you said this happened a number of times and that makes sense. Was there a particular time that there was an interesting story around how you were able, how did you get out of the hole? Like you fall in, like it's a thing to get out. How did you get out?
Well, I think, there's the meme or the story of the, giant piece of equipment that goes offline and they have to call up a retiree and ask them to come in and fix it because nobody in the industry, nobody currently knows how to fix it. And he comes in, evaluates it, it takes him 15 minutes and he takes a hammer and he whacks it in a certain spot and the machine starts operating again and he sends an invoice in and, the invoice is for $30,000 and the manager says, how could you charge me that much? Well, it was a dollar for swinging the hammer and $29,999 to know exactly where to hit it. That's the key question. Are you paying for the value in that specific way that you need? So, a baseball team is a good example, right? Yes, a shortstop could play first base, but are they really best at first base? I'd rather have the shortstop when we need a shortstop, right, in that particular role. So in the case of Acumatica implementations, when you're interviewing integrators or VARs, you want to make sure you're picking a VAR that not only has got the right lead for the project, right? Don't just interview the VAR. Make sure you're picking somebody that you understand who the team is you're going to get, because that one person isn't going to know non-inventorial items for construction in the same way that somebody who's an Acumatica retail person would. How are they going to integrate with a scheduling module? Or what about the data flows between Salesforce and Acumatica, or between a payroll environment? If I'm going to link lumber in with Acumatica and I need those to work together, you're putting an awful lot of pressure on a VAR who's selling you Acumatica to know more than just Acumatica. So you want to make sure you understand that they're going to have a team of people behind that person that's working with you on an implementation project that hits the specific subdomains. Remember, I talked about the functional use cases for an ERP. Well, does that VAR have some of that experience in your specific industry, so they can, in fact, tag team or bring in somebody for 2 meetings, right? An expert in one area for 2 meetings is going to save you 10 meetings worth of rework. And it's not because that first person, it's almost because they weren't expert enough to know they didn't know, but they had the team behind them where they could pull in somebody. And that's what happened with us. You get into specific sub activities like, payroll. Okay, great. Everybody knows what payroll is, but do you know what prevailing wage payroll is? Do you know what certified payroll is? Do you know, ERP environments, when you talk about time and materials billing, how is Acumatica set up to do time and materials? And am I using it for the revenue side, or am I using it for the expense side? Well, those are actually 2 very different questions. If I'm going to have to bill because of time card data, I need to have somebody who understands that particular aspect of revenue billing in the ERP, and somebody different who understands how am I collecting all that time and how am I going to be costing that time. 2 different aspects. And often you'll get somebody who understands Acumatica, but doesn't understand that workflow all the way through from let's say time card all the way through to charging the client and AR. And that's what I had to do. When we brought in our initial team, we actually sat down with them and actively probed, what are we missing from around this table? And who are we going to call when we get to that page? Because I can't afford to hire all those people. Right? I need an expert when we get to that section, and I need somebody that can be able to join the team for that particular area, and have the rest of the experts around the team haven't taken it far enough, but then bring in that specific tag expert. And that's a little different than what we used to be able to do, because usually you'd hire a contractor or a company and expect them to have all of that. And I just don't think that's the case anymore. I think you need to be able to have free agents, people that you bring in who may not be part of your VAR, your own team and your own talent, as well as potentially even having community forum groups where you can post and ask questions on best practices when you don't have the talent. Well, those are all different skills that you're going to need and be able to fill it in. And you want to get to those early in the process rather than after the fact, because it's often much easier to know that you're going to have a shortcoming in something, identify that we have that shortcoming, make the decision that it's okay, and we'll bring in that expertise later. And how are we going to design it knowing we have to fill it in? Then define that gap later on, because at that point, there's an expectation that there shouldn't be any gaps. It's a mistake, right? There's always gaps. There's always issues. Identifying them early doesn't mean you have to solve them all. It means you've clearly identified them, and then you can find the right talent to fill them in that project plan and timeline. And sometimes it's even after you go live, and you decide you're going to go live with the core, and then you're going to add these things, and you get buy-in from your stakeholders that that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Shel. And having someone like you uh, who has that kind of knowledge. So many ERP end user companies have executives who don't have that depth of understanding to even know that kind of thing. Jeremy, you're on the VAR side of that. I'm sure some of this is stuff that you've dealt with, but I'm curious. I guess I'm curious in two things. Whatever's more interesting to you. Number one, back to that original question of like a pitfall that you may have found yourself falling into and how you got out of it, or that equally interesting question is I bet you've been on the receiver end of this, where you have had a client who perhaps you have not had the exact talent on hand within the VAR, but had to be able to figure out how to serve the client, because you're the partner of record. Whichever way you'd like to go, I say choose your own adventure on that, Jeremy. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think what might be most interesting is if I speak a little bit towards what Shel was talking about, and I think from a VAR's perspective, because he mentioned specifically hiring a VAR, how you want to interview them, having outside assistance for that VAR, and then hiring a team, your own team, appropriately. And I think that's from my perspective. I think that when we go into any engagement, we understand that ERP implementations both improve people's lives and destroy them. so I mean, you do very much. You can have somebody who's been in your company for 20 years, who's very valuable to you, and then you're implementing an ERP, and that person may not have the capacity to change or to pivot to understand the new to understand the ERP. So that's going to affect them dramatically, because that's a challenge for them. The company has to then determine where they're going to place that person. On the flip side of that, an ERP, when it comes in, can help magnify the skill sets and save time for the employees that are already there and free them up to stop worrying about potential minutia or wasted time within their processes, because the ERP is effective and efficient enough that it's relieving them to be more creative and to solve more interesting problems than how to print a check, or it takes me this long to do this process and I do it every month. And if I just had that time back, if I could take my 2-day process and turn it into a 3-hour process instead, what would that mean for my end of the month closing? How would I be able to produce more visibility for the CEO or for the stakeholders? So in that whole process, the VAR has to be very attentive and curious about what the real problems are, what the company and what the stakeholders are willing, what pain threshold they have, and what their model is for what they're going to do with their staff and what they really want to accomplish. Sometimes they want to simplify and grow. Sometimes they recognize that their software just is getting aged and it's not staying modern. And sometimes it is, we're going to merge with a series of other companies and we need to be flexible. So there's all sorts of different ways that or rationale for bringing on a new ERP system. Sometimes it's cost, all sorts of things. So you just have to be very curious in the process of asking those questions. And then Shel's right. Like you don't necessarily always have all the talent. And so as a VAR, it's possible to hire an expert in all these different areas, but financially it's problematic to keep them busy all the time. And so we find that it's best, we have a number of full-time staff that are kind of core staff that both handle internal projects for us. They might handle process changes, they might handle rewriting of an SOP, a standard operating procedure, things of that nature, while they're assisting other clients. And then we have contractors that we've brought in that are experts in various areas. The benefit is that I can have an expert I can talk to. I can be curious with the company, ask them about what their problems are, understand that in phase 2, they're going to have a specific challenge with distribution or with field services or things of that nature. We might not have in our pool of resources an expert specific in that area. So then my path then is I call Julian. I say, Julian, we have a new client. This is what they're looking at. Julian, you know our philosophy. You understand we're a boutique agency that cares that's curious in this way and that cares in this way. Do you have access to, or do you know of a contractor or somebody maybe who's looking to move from their current role who would be interested in this particular area? Would they like to try it out, or do they have space? And then we bring them onto our team. The benefit of being able to work with contractors in that way is that the learning period, they're hungry and they want to please both the client and us as the VAR, as who's giving them the work, and ensure that they're following along with our philosophy and meeting the needs of the client. There is a learning phase still, of course, but when you hire somebody, that learning phase usually is between, it could be 3 months to a year before you decide whether or not they're actually a good fit sometimes, unfortunately, because with their ability to scale, their ability to learn, their how do they handle stress, things of that nature. If I work with a contractor and I recognize right out of the gate, oh, they are amazing with dealing with this type of a personality or this type of stress, I would love to put them in contact with these other clients that we have that have this personality profile and use them in that way. It's also possible that you bring on a contractor and they might have the expertise, but it's not philosophically a great fit. Well, you don't have to continue to use them. I can say, hey, Julian, this person's great, but that we're having some challenges in this way. We can work with them together, or do you have another resource for me? And so eventually what you end up doing is building a core team that can handle a robust amount of challenges and problems with a variety of companies based upon their whether or not that pool of individuals has the time, without having to take on the full burden of full-time employment of all those employees. And then the other benefit is that while they're working with me, they're also hopefully sharing best practices that they've gathered from Shel, best practices that they've gathered from other VARs or other clients they've worked with in unique industries, and sharing that with us and helping us grow. That's a more open communication style, because they're not worried about offending me as much as if I bring in an employee and I'm trying to bring them into a philosophy that we're trying to create. Rather, when somebody comes in from the outside, they can say, well, that's a beautiful philosophy. Here's 5 other ways that I've seen it. And they're more open with sharing that sometimes than somebody who might be a long-term employee, or somebody who's new, who's trying to adopt the philosophy, if that makes sense. But that's my take on it.
Jeremy, how have you, because I've seen you, right? I watched you grow your organization, and
Sure.
there is a lot of people who would say, I'm not going to use, the reason I can't use contractors is because I have a culture here. We have a way of doing things. We have a way of working together that if I'm using a bunch of ragtag, hodgepodge, mishmash of people from all over the place with different backgrounds and different communication styles and different expectations, that it becomes a bunch of like lead cooks in a little kitchen. How have you been able, and I'm sure that's been a challenge, but how do you deal with that challenge in a way, and has it been effective for you?
Because they're not ragtag, because instead of hiring them myself, instead of necessarily posting, I use people who understand my philosophy and help vet those people in the practice, and who want to deal with good people. I know this sounds like an advertisement, but if I tell you this is what I need, Julian, you're not going to give me somebody who offends people on a regular basis. You've already vetted that person, and so I understand that happens. But also, I mean, honestly, why couldn't we just be a breath of fresh air? Why couldn't we just say, this is our philosophy, this is what we want to do? How does that feel to you? What's your, do you want to work that way? Is this something that you think that you can do? Yeah, I do think I can do that. One of the problems that I see with that is this: would you mind if I handled a specific problem in this way? Not at all. In fact, I think that's something that we would adopt and we'd appreciate. Or I love your philosophy. This is something I would like to modify. Can I do it in this way? And I say, that's great. Could I put a slight tilt on what you're offering and see if you'll accept that? And then
that's really interesting.
Yeah. You just adopt them into it. And if they don't want to play your way, then you can recognize that sometimes that they're just a specific tool for a company that has a specific problem that might not need my philosophy. They might need somebody to go in and behave in a different way, and I can still keep them for that chore, that's a judgment call that I would use based upon our future client base.
Got that. What's interesting with both you, Shel, and Jeremy, I mean, I've served both of you in providing talent to you, as we've talked about, and I want to say something that I don't want it to be salesy or like trying to tout my company's thing, but there's something to be said here, which it's been something I've fought against for my entire career as a recruiting leader and a staffing leader. In that our industry, it's Jeremy, you've talked about one of the reasons that it's worked for you is because, well, you can tell me that you need someone who's going to actually be able to work well with this kind of client. And I personally know some of the nuances and personalities of some of Premier's clients. Shel, I know some of your team members. We've been involved in hiring some of them successfully and not successfully. I know very deeply. I feel like I and my team who has worked for you have known this deeply. What's interesting about that is most recruiting and staffing does not work that way. As you guys know, when I work, I've always worked in recruiting. I've always worked on a retained basis where you hire me. I'm the only one working on it. There's nobody else that's feeding you resumes. You pay up front for a portion of it. You pay for the rest of it when I finish. That's been on the recruiting side. And I've worked with you a little on recruiting, but mostly on staffing. But what's interesting is if we were working in an old model where I did not have the depth of knowledge of your organization and your personalities and your company's culture, that approach that Jeremy just described would not really work very well because I wouldn't know how to deliver with that kind of nuance. I wouldn't have the ability to bring that in the first place. And I love how that success has been able to happen. And you have been able to rely on those resources and just know that they're going to come at the quality that you need in order that you can have the talent to talk to and vet in the first place. I think that would not be possible.
The axiom that culture eats strategy for lunch is a real one, but you also have a responsibility as an organizational leader to position a contractor or a project, VAR, and a third party for success in your organization. Yes, they are not necessarily part of your company culture. No, they aren't going to dramatically influence on a day-to-day basis your company culture. They won't have time to learn the nuances of your company culture. But you have to position them for the value that they're going to bring. But you also need to work with your partner, your recruiter, your staffing firm, the VAR, to say, hey, these are some areas that are just going to rub too much against the grain for us. Yes, we know that they're only here for the duration of this project, or they're here for this particular skill set that they bring. But if they are just too opposite of the company culture, we can't get to that benefit of that expertise. So there's a balance there, right? Because if I'm staffing, and I know what the outcome is going to be, I can work with the team to say, this is what we expect from that staffing role, this contract role. They're coming in because they're bringing us best practices, industry expertise in X for the duration of this project. Let's learn from them, and let's make sure we are open and sharing what our current processes are. But I think Jeremy touched on it well, which is you could have a 20-year employee who understands their current pain point, and they're working from that point forward. An expert is working from the end result backwards, right? They know what's possible without the constraints of the current baggage of the company. Well, there's benefits to both perspectives, right? But you've got to be able to have those communications where the 20-year employee really says, well, what I'd really like to benefit from is solving this pain point that I have. And the expert needs to be able to hear that, understand that story, and apply their knowledge based on, is this something that we're going to be able to deliver and when, right? Not necessarily just agree or say, yeah, we'll prioritize the project on that, because maybe it's not a critical path item, but it could come later. And so what you end up with is you don't want a consultant or a contractor or an expert who comes in and just agrees with everybody, because 100% yeses means no. because you're just not going to get there. You're not going to achieve it. So one of the reasons you start out with 41% are, go
Overspend.
over budget or over schedule is because many employees don't know what the possibilities are of the products that they have been purchased for them. And
That's
so they're trying
really
to
good
take
point.
their current workflow after the project has been kicked off and say, give me this, and then add benefits to it.
Yeah.
That
Shel,
actually isn't the right approach.
that is a really interesting point that you make, because you're one of the few people that come from the end user community who have the knowledge and skill to recognize that, because you have an understanding of the ERP system, but you have an understanding of the business of your end user company. What would you say to people in your position who have been C-level people with end users who do not have the knowledge or the experience to recognize this? They see something's not working that is this, but they don't know exactly what it is, or especially they don't know where to go, because they can ask the publisher, but the publisher may not give them the right answer, and they can ask their VAR, which may or may not, and often may not, give them sage advice as good as it could be. What would you recommend to those people who are in that scenario?
Well, what has worked well for me is making sure that I have a very tight and limited success criteria, so that we are clear we're all talking about the same thing. What does success look like in this specific thing, not overall? So, for example, if you say, well, I need my days outstanding receivables to go from whatever it is now to 20% better, right? I want to improve that. Okay, that is success criteria for one person on the project or 5 people. Is that project success criteria? Or is that for one individual? Right? Because if you don't have good success criteria identified, then when you have this mismatch of skills, are they arguing because they're arguing about something else that they think is more important? Or are they arguing about how to achieve that success criteria? So I think you start to see a fork in the pain of the project, and causing delays because you're not all on the same page about what you're trying to achieve. So getting clear success criteria from the different stakeholders and being clear, okay, here is from the experts that we have brought in, these are the ones that we're going to achieve in phase 1. These are the ones that are phase 2. And these we don't have a path to achieve right now, and we have to work on those. Will reduce a lot of that tension for you and a lot of ways.
Thank you.
But beyond that, from a C-level perspective, I heard something from a mentor many years ago that really made sense to me, which is everybody is an expert in what their purview is, and when are they the most productive? When do they get the most work done? It's just before they go on vacation, because they all of a sudden hone in on, I have to have these things done before I step away, right? And all the other noise gets cleared away. Like, okay, I'm not gonna do that stuff. I'm not gonna do this stuff. I've got to make sure I get these things done. So one of the things that I have learned is, what are those things for a person on that project team, right? Imagine you all were taking a 3-week vacation next week. What has to be done before you go? Those often help you get to what a success story looks like. Because people do know, but often they think success is removing pain that they have. And that actually isn't, removing pain isn't actually success. Achieving a result is success. And so finding a way to document that success story helps, I think, get you the right people, because you can say, these are the things we need to achieve. And if they don't know your industry or they don't know the area, I would count on you or Jeremy to make sure you're not sending me somebody that can't help me achieve those success stories. And then if I'm evaluating how we're doing, that's what I'm saying. What is the progress in achieving each of these success stories? And then am I hearing the same thing from my team as I'm hearing from those contractors or consultants or experts that we brought in? If I'm not, then I've got to figure out how to close that gap, right?
Yeah.
I've got to make sure that I'm helping those two parties get closer together. And it may be that we have the wrong expert, or it may be that the team member, the 20-year team member, is focused on the pain, not on the solution.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that's excellent, Shel. Thank you so much. Really, really sound. What I realized is that there are actual discussion questions. I got so interested and wrapped up in your stories. I always love stories more than like prepared questions. So I apologize for that. But I am going to ask a couple of questions, and I would love if we could just, if you guys have some short responses, maybe we keep our responses to a minute or 2 minutes or something like that. But let me ask you a few questions for either one of you to answer. The first is, what was the turning point that made you realize you needed outside help? And maybe in one scenario, was there a certain scenario where you realized, hey, you know what, we are simply not able to achieve something that's critical. We really need to have a more ERP specialist, more on staff. Was there a moment or a turning point in your experience? Maybe you, Jeremy, to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had forced reductions from our investor or our parent company. They did forced reductions across the board, and so it was across their whole company, and they did that without a lot of thought. They asked us to come up with some of the casualties, so to speak. And in the process of that, other individuals in the company became weak in the knees and decided to look for other roles. So even though they were very solid in our company, they saw that and said, well, that doesn't feel good or right to me. So let me look for something else. And so they ended up moving to another company. Well, in the process of that, of course, that, there was people that there were clients that relied on them, that built relationships with them. And since we had a very narrow and lean team, when that occurred, they all of a sudden felt like we didn't have the expertise to serve them. And so they started looking other places. So we've deepened our bench. We brought on additional contractors, and we have access to about 65 different contractors now. And so in the process of it, what people are now getting to get to know is a philosophy of service. And they always know that if they have a challenge that they can call me, they can call our CEO, they have direct access, and we can resolve it quickly. And so they get used to a philosophy of how we engage with problems. And while I want them to have real relationships with with our consultants, the contractors, the philosophy of the company is what I hope that they're binding to.
Great.
Then that enables us, if there is a transition or if there's a personality conflict between one contractor and a client or a particular employee, then we can pivot and essentially find the same or very similar skill set with another personality and keep on moving. And so that's one of the circumstances that initiated us using a good portion of contractors.
Yep, got that. Shel, how did using contract?
Yeah, I think the thing that I did on that first one is you often want to staff a project with those experts, but I find that you're failing to at times recognize that more time from one of your own team would be more beneficial. So often the staffing isn't on the project level, it's to backfill for one of your own peoples to free them up, to move them into focus on the project. So, instead of just hiring some experts for the project and to help deliver, maybe one of the things you need to do is to help deliver day to day in the current operating environment. So, if you're implementing Acumatica and you're historically an ERP, a different ERP platform, maybe what you need is a contractor for the old ERP platform to come in so that they can be helping just day-to-day operations to free up some of your own team's time to help them move forward. Learn the new platform and focus their time on the project. And that often isn't something you think, well, your team is so experienced, they can keep doing what they're doing today. But are you stretching them too far? And if you really need them to be focused on the future, can you unanchor them from some of the past by bringing in some talent on things that aren't go forward for you, but are needed to keep you running day to day? And that's where contract staffing can really be helpful.
That's good. You totally answered that second question by elaborating on what Jeremy said, which was, it sounds to me like is one of the values that you found in utilizing contract talent was not just in what the contractor brings to the table, but the fact that they can free up your own internal people to be able to do what they need to do to be most effective. Would you agree?
Yeah, and that is, flex staffing to a certain degree, because maybe it's you're bringing in two contractors and they're each going to be half-time supporting two other people, right? So you can get a little more flexible to free up other people's time to focus on the project, because your own team is going to be living with the new solution. The contractors aren't. And so sometimes if you overload the future project with contractors, your own team doesn't have the buy-in on what they hope to achieve. So some of it
Oh,
is future investment, right? You're investing
totally.
in your own team now to help them, understand that you're going to free up some of their time so they can really focus their resource and energy on helping what the future will look like.
And they'll have ownership. They get kind of ownership stake in
Yeah,
in this process. Yeah.
absolutely. And then in other cases, I've used, from a speed perspective, okay, reporting is a good example. There are some reports that all of us need data out of these systems, and we need reports, and we're used to having reports in our current format. And you often spend a lot of cycles trying to get the new solution to match your old reporting format. One thing that worked for me to speed things up was, let's take the base reports that exist, and just acknowledge up front that we have deltas. We're not going to have these fields. They're not going to be presented in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
But then do a clear guide. I've even produced reports that have an empty column that say, we know we need this filled. We don't have it right now. Because it's easier for them then to see the old world in the new report, even if you
Yeah.
don't have the exact data there. Well, that's something some outside ERP talent can do quickly for you. And then you can figure out, okay, did I ever really need that thing? Are
Yeah.
they, as opposed to spending all the time to get everything to match exactly. And then after the fact, you've just blown a lot of budget to basically map your reporting to the way you used to operate, as
Yeah.
opposed to
Yeah.
necessarily the talent. I mean, the way the tools can deliver,
Yep.
today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jeremy, when you look back, is there one thing that you wish? Is there something, a main thing that stands out that you wish you had known earlier about your methodology for scaling out that you would have known 5 years ago or 4 years ago? I don't know, several years ago.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this a little bit, and so my job essentially, I think, is to collect resources and to solve problems, right? And it's a little bit of a silly analogy, but if you're thinking about if you think of the tide coming in, you don't always, when you have enough buckets to catch the water you need to catch at first, you feel like you're okay, but when they start to fill up, it's too late to get the next bucket. So
Oh,
you really need to, when you're in your contractors and your team, they're busy enough. And sometimes you really want to be efficient and profitable and use what you have. And I can respect and understand that. However, if you have an influx of business, or if you have a transition challenge, if you have a death in somebody's family who's on your team, and all of a sudden that bucket's gone, you're now overflowing. And when you're overflowing,
mm,
you don't have creativity to solve additional problems or pivot. So I
oh,
would suggest what you can do with the contractors is, as they get busy enough, as you get them to a point where they feel comfortable and they understand your philosophy, and there's enough work for them
mm,
to keep them engaged with you, that look for someone else. I think that it's
mm,
important to start adopting and bringing somebody else on when you don't have a massive need, than to hire quickly, or kind of scramble to bring somebody into your philosophy. And you may bring somebody on that's not fully vetted, or that is kind of a quick response, rather than taking your time to bring somebody on. And then, so
yeah.
as that tide comes in, you're able to fill those buckets a little bit more easily. I think that would be something that I would suggest.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate that. Um, I think that this part here, we've covered there. There is a three-part framework in being able to scale and sacrificing, and I think that through the things that you guys have said, we've really talked about that. One being role mapping, knowing what you need to hire before you hire. Shel, I think I heard a lot of. I mean, that's something that you do all the time. Contract versus full time, choosing based on your project needs. I think Jeremy, I've heard a lot. I know your model has built out, really used extensively contract. And I think that you've done a particularly good job at being able to figure out what can be done, what is possible with a person who is not a full-time permanent member of the team, and have done a really good job with that. And of course, partnering with experts, whether that be a recruiting or a staffing firm, or that be other organizations, being able to partner to making that hiring decisions and making that easier, the scalability of your talent easier, has been something that both of you guys have utilized. So I think that's really, really solid. There's a few, we put out a couple of benchmarks for ERP talent. I know we don't have a lot of time left here, but I just want to, of these 3 benchmarks that you guys see here, what we have here is more of a senior ERP consultant. We have a scale of like a very junior developer. What I've found is we've created a ERP salary guide, a salary guide for hiring in the ERP world, whether that's for partners or ISVs, or whether that is for end users. It kind of comprises all of those ranges. And what I found in this is that the range that someone earns is a massive thing. Like you look at an ERP consultant earning 90K to 176 is a huge spread. It's 100% more than the junior. And I find that there are so many factors that cause that compensation number to be what it is. Have you guys had particular challenges around compensation levels for the folks that you've hired? Is there anything that stands out to you as particularly today? 3.5 years ago, it was a very different story. Today, have you seen, in terms of the trend for compensation, is there anything that's been noteworthy in your mind that is worth mentioning at this time?
I wish I could go back to college and come out at the wage now. I mean, I wish I could I wish I could do that. I feel like again, it's with value. You have to understand that. I think that from my perspective, I think people need to be flexible. Sometimes you can pay somebody very well for something very specific, but I believe you want to hire somebody who also wants to grow, who also wants to contribute, and who's a little bit hungry. And you can pay somebody a little bit more than what you probably should to begin with, to ensure that you're finding somebody that's going to be with you for a long time, that has the right philosophy. I find that somebody's likability, my desire to want to speak with them is very important, because that will be whether or not my clients are going to want to engage in a conversation with them, and whether or not they have a good bedside manner. Those things are important. And you pay for things of that nature that aren't on a resume sometimes. You bring them in that way. But to be just frank, that I'm always surprised at where at the value that people believe that they have. And so when people are humble and they say, this is what I need, or this is what I need for my family, I take those into consideration sometimes a little bit more. And maybe that's a weakness of mine, but I take that into consideration a little bit more than I do sometimes somebody who says, I've got 95 implementations.
Yeah, I get it.
I want to understand, do you have the capacity and the caliber to listen to somebody's problems and pivot? And if you don't have the right answer, are you humble enough and brave enough to find somebody who does? Like that's something that's worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, you hire like an investor looks at an investment. That's what I've seen you do well. Shel, is there anything you might just very briefly, a couple minutes?
You need to know if you're where you're strong and where you need help within your own organization. Are you bringing in people that are going to temporarily augment because you have a temporary need? Or are you looking to try and buy, where you're going to end up hoping to find talent that can stay with you? If you're doing the talent that can stay with you, make sure you're matching for culture, not just skill. If you're looking for, just for the duration of the project in areas that you have a bubble and you need to augment for that short term, you can give up some on the culture side, and it's worth paying a little more for those, temporary skills, because it's not going to throw your overall pay scale out of whack for the rest of the organization, because you're really focused on a short term.
Really good. Yep. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Final takeaways on this: prioritizing quality, not just speed. Absolutely what you guys have been talking about. Um, Leveraging contractors where they shine, integration, mitigate migration, using pinch hitters, essentially, something that Jeremy's doing. Um, uh, I don't know, this final one: retain recruiting works better when done. That's true. That's very true. In any case, I really want to thank you, both of you, Shel Waggener, Jeremy Houskeeper. I really appreciate you both. I wondered if you guys wanted to, if anybody wanted to reach you for whatever reason, if they had questions directly for you or wanted to get in touch with you, can you both let me know kind of what's the email, what's the phone, how might they be best to reach you if
Yeah,
to
since you have
connect?
your contact and we continue to work together, Julian, if anybody would like to engage with me, feel free to reach out to Julian and he'll put us in touch.
Absolutely.
You bet. The fortune of having last name of Housekeeper is it's pretty rare. So you can find me on LinkedIn if you want to. Jeremy Housekeeper, Premier Tech Partners. And then Jeremy H at scalewithpremier.com is where you can find me.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much. To our listening audiences, if you want to reach me, you can see on the screen, you can do that. If you want to look at our salary guide for this year, it's a comprehensive, about 10-page document that includes salary ranges for people in US and Canada, both contract and permanent. And you can use this QR code to download that salary guide. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving me an hour. Audience, thank you very much. Amy, thank you for moderating or for administering this. And again, just appreciate everybody here.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Julie.
Take care, everybody.
Have
Thank
a great
you.
day.
Bye-bye.